I'd like to bring this meeting to order. I'd like to ask Reverend Alderman Davis to please do the invocation followed by the Pledge of Allegiance.
Let us begin by taking a moment of silence to remember the Reverend Ronald E. Davis, who was the pastor of Mount Carmel AME Church, who passed away last week, and a very valued and beloved member of this community, as well as the community he served in many different ways in Wilmington. So let us pray. Almighty God, we thank you for the blessings you bestow upon Southport, all who live here, who work here, who visit here. We ask you to keep us mindful of those blessings and ways that we can best serve this community. Keep us ever mindful of that so that we can be guided by your wisdom in making good and right decisions for the benefit of Southport. Amen.
You may notice we're one alderman short. She will be here. She had a family issue. She'll be here in a few minutes. All right. Next item is the public comment. I was going to say Madam Clerk. I apologize. Noah is our brand new city clerk. Sir, do we have anybody signed up?
We do. William Fly.
Good evening, Mayor and City Aldermen. I'm Bill Flight, a resident of Southport. Public comments were made at a recent meeting of the Brunswick County Board of Commissioners on 3 issues: annexation, ETJ, and TIA. I'm not trying to go into the acronyms because of your time limitation. I'm sure you're all familiar with these acronyms. A letter to the editor on these issues appeared in a pilot in Beacon during the past 2 weeks. Hopefully, if you haven't read my letter, please do so. A case was made that the local representatives in the North Carolina General Assembly and/or county commissioners should be voted out of office in November because they continue to make decisions in favor of developers rather than in favor of citizens like you and me. Your time limit will not allow me to read the recent letter, but I will read one of my letters written in 2012. And when I start reading it, you would think that I wrote it last week, okay? Because there's a pattern here. So this is the year after my leaving the Brunswick County Planning Board. Let me make a public confession before reading the letter. And I always like to have some humor because after reading this old letter, my blood pressure went up, so I'm going to try to calm down, okay? But anyway, you heard it saying what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. So in regard to this public confession, what I say in the Alderman's meeting will stay in the Alderman's meeting. But anyway, those who know me will verify that I am a diehard Democrat. However, I voted for the Republican chairman of the Board of Commissioners during a critical period when we were updating an important document, namely the UDO, Unified Development Ordinance. If you want to know his name, check the front of the administrative building the next time you go to the county complex. Sometimes you have to put other things like overdevelopment before party loyalty. So I want to read the letter that I wrote to the local papers again in 2012. There's been tremendous growth in the Southport area during my 35 years as a citizen of the waterfront town. I moved here in 1976, which means I've been here 48 years, but at this time that I wrote this letter, I've been here 35 years. However, I was mystified when the official population remained relatively stable over 3 decades. I did not understand why the town failed to fill several potholes in a road beside an abandoned drugstore near the main street. And I'll add some that's current. As a deacon of the local church, I did not understand why the fire department started charging for inspections recently when just a few years or so ago they provide these services free of charge. This is not in that letter, but I'm just adding that. The mysteries were solved when I found that city limit signs were actually placed at points that would normally define the center of a town or city. And I might add that the same location for the city limit sign on Moore Street is at the same place that it was 48 years ago when I moved to Southport. That's horrible. There were freeloading of city services when developers built subdivisions just outside the drawn-in city limit. Residents of these subdivisions have the benefit of city services, fire, rescue, and police services, good shopping, and tourist attractions without the corresponding tax bill. And I don't have this in that letter, but I'll just ask the chief of police, and he doesn't have, it's hypothetical, he doesn't have to answer it. What happens when you're chasing a criminal, a wild dog, the policeman or the dog catcher? Do you stop at, I don't want to name this development, or do you call the deputy sheriff or the dog catcher of the county? Just asking. State legislators have an opportunity during their short session to do the right thing by refusing to challenge the recent decision of an appeals court that has supported the annexation effort of Southport, Wilmington, and other cities in North Carolina. But 2 of the legislators, your local legislators, who are still in office now, they sided with the developers, and that's why we have these crazy city limits like we have today, instead of an orderly expansion of the city limits. They should also allow citizens of towns and cities to vote along with non-residents during the petition stage of the annexation process. And this is why my blood pressure started going up, because I had forgotten that as a citizen, I could not vote when the decision was being made about this annexation bill. It's a case in the courts. So these changes would be fair to everyone, and there would be taxation with representation. Now they're getting representation of services without taxation. And I'm getting mad again like I did in 2012 because these folks in these developments. And I know I'm probably going over time. Seemingly these, our local representatives are so smart in trying to figure out ways to support developers. See if they can't figure out some way to grandfather in maybe the current folks who are embedded in our city limits in our town, but make the new people who owners, folks who are buying these new homes that they're going to develop, they should pay city taxes so that I won't have to be paying for inspections of my church, by the fire department. I know we're going over the time, and I apologize. So this goes to the clerk, right? Thank you for your time.
Yes, sir, thank you.
John Mann.
John, are you waiving your time, sir? Thank you.
That's all.
Okay, now we'll close public comment. The next agenda item is the approval of the agenda. Do I hear a motion to approve the agenda? Is there a second to that motion? There's a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Not hearing any. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? It's unanimous. Thank you very much. So The next one is the approval of the consent agenda. Do I hear a motion to accept the consent agenda? Is there a second? Second. There's a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Not hearing any. All in favor say aye. Any opposed? It's unanimous. Thank you. I'm going to go over the consent agenda topics real quick so everybody knows what they are. There's minutes from a regular board meeting from June 13th, a special budget meeting from June 17th, minutes from the special meeting on June 21st, minutes from another meeting on June 26th, minutes from another meeting on July 11th. There's a closed session from June 13th, and there's a public hearing set for signs. And I've got to pull that up so that we have the dates. The public hearing for the overall UDO thing for signs is on September 12th, and the second one is for political signs is on September 12th. They're separated out because the political signs we have to do something about that. Early voting in North Carolina starts on October 17th. You back up 30 days because you're allowed to put the signs up. And means you're in September in the 17th, 18th time frame, and we have a meeting on the 12th. So that one probably will be voted on after the public hearing on the 12th, just as an FYI. All right. I'm going to go to I'm sorry, yes. If any member knows of any conflict of interest or the appearance of a conflict of interest concerning matters on the agenda, please so state at this time. Seeing none, we move on to the public hearing on the UDO amendment. Mo Meehan. Mo, can you hold on just for 1 second? I need to make a motion to go into public hearing. There's a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Not hearing any. All in favor say aye. It's unanimous. Thank you. Ma'am, the ball is in your court.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Board of Aldermen. This is a public hearing to consider Section 4.14 Recreation and Open Space for some amendments. At your request, the Planning Board considered changes to the open space requirements for conventional subdivisions, and the following are their recommendations. So they want to decrease the number of lots that trigger the open space requirements. Now it is 20 lots, so no open space is required for any subdivision unless there are 20 lots being considered. They would like to change that to 5, and I think that especially with the smaller parcels that are still available in Southport, I think this would be a beneficial change. And then they also increased the multiplier for open space as proposed previously in some of the UDO changes. So they're increasing for R10 properties. They're going to be exclusive of 404 wetlands, and it would be a 5% multiplier, and then a 1% multiplier for R20 lots. And the PUD will remain at 20% with exclusive of the 404 wetlands. So to give you an idea, the changes that you will see, for a 5-lot subdivision in R10, you would have a 1/4 acre, whereas now you would have no open space requirements. And for an R20, you would have a 1/2 acre of open space. To give you an idea if that's the 5 lots, and it goes up exponentially. So 10 homes or lots would be a 1/2 acre, 10 lots would be 1 whole acre for R20. So those are the changes that are proposed, and that is what we have for that one.
Is there anybody here, excuse me, is there anybody here who wants to speak on behalf of the open space? Okay. Go ahead.
Mo, I have a question. Typically, the language regarding for wetlands and stuff is consistent with the PUD language.
Yes.
Did they consider stormwater ponds? We eliminated that from open space, being able to count stormwater ponds as the open space requirement.
They did not. They just specifically looked at the wetland requirements.
Okay.
What would be the process for adding that?
You have the authority to do that now, if you would like to include that.
I'm sorry, what?
You have the authority to add that to the changes here now, if you'd like to do so.
Without sending it back to the planning board?
Correct.
Well, I'd like to make a motion that we add that. I mean, I know we're not going to take a vote tonight because it's public hearing, and we typically don't vote on the night that we have a public hearing on a topic, but I'd like to add that.
Robert, were you going to say something?
I'm not sure there's a need for a motion until we are ready to vote on it. We can make that motion change at that time.
I mean, I think Robert's right to the extent that staff could just, take that clarifying change, add it to it, and then essentially you all can either do one or the other. But I don't have any heartburn if the motion kind of gives staff more directive. But I think we're fine because that way you guys are not binded on having to adopt that and kind of piecemeal it as the second portion of that. We're all together. You vote next week.
So you're going to withdraw the motion and ask staff to have two documents ready? Okay. I'm sorry. Anybody else have any questions, comments? Okay. All right. The second topic is the right-of-way. Oh, you're up again, ma'am.
So this second hearing is for an update to 3.17D, landscaping on public property, and 3.14C2, minimum off-street parking requirements. As you know, the Code of Ordinances was updated in May to speak about the obstructions of right-of-way, giving clarification and allowing parking improvements in the right-of-way. So this UDO update is going to be language to mirror what was adopted for the Code of Ordinances. So in addition to the previous language that did not allow anything above the plane of the existing ground, this new language allows the installation of turf grasses and that there's no installation of anything that would create an obstruction of persons or vehicles or will hinder lawful parking. That's for the landscaping section. The next section is the minimum street parking requirements. This outlines the allowances for the improvements in the right-of-way for parking spaces, and that parking shall remain open and not reserved for the owners of the properties that have constructed the spaces. And also, it's going to be adding that the parking request will be reviewed by the Development Services, Public Works, and Fire Marshal. Existing parking can remain, and vegetation or protective measures can be added to limit damage to trees due to the parking. So those were exact verbiage that was brought forward from the Code of Ordinances.
Is there anybody in the public who wants to speak on the right-of-way issue? All right. Is there anybody on the board that wants to speak on the right-of-way issue? All right. Once again, since it is a public hearing, we'll go back and we'll vote on this at another meeting and digest the information. If there's anybody in the public that couldn't make the meeting, or you go home and you said, wish I had asked that, please contact the clerk, send the information to the clerk so that all seven of us can get it at the same time, as opposed to picking one of us, which may not get the information back and forth. And with that, I will ask for a motion to close public comment.
So moved.
There's a motion and a second. Is there any comment? Not hearing any. All those in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? It's unanimous. Thank you very much. That brings us to agenda item 1, the discussion and relinquish of the ETJ impacts by our city manager, Mr. Terrell. And Mo.
Still learning the technology, but here I am. Okay, so look, there's a lot of things going on with the ETJ. I know there is some concern about the fiscal impacts of what's going on with the ETJ in addition to what's happening at the county. First of all, for the board, please see the handout so you can follow along rather than the screen. Okay, so this is fiscal impacts of the transfer of the ETJ to the county. All right, so let's start with the impact on revenues. Sales tax revenue. Sales tax revenue is based on population within the city limits. So the city will not lose any sales tax collections from sales tax revenue with the loss of the ETJ. Ad valorem tax revenue. Only residents of the corporate limits pay property taxes. So the loss of the ETJ will not affect ad valorem revenues. ABC revenue. This revenue will not be affected by the loss of the ETJ. I think people drink alcohol regardless of whether they're into ETJ or not. All right, so electricity. All customers connected to Southport's electrical grid pay the same rate. So whether they reside in the ETJ or in the city, it has no impact because it's just based on the account of whether they're connected to the city or not. They have the option to do that, but the accounts don't change just because of the loss of the ETJ. We're just managing those as accounts. So no lost revenue there. Public services. The water sewer merger is complete. This is not related to the ETJ. This is a separate issue. Fire rescue. Fire inspection revenue is somewhat affected. Chief Drew, I'm sorry, I had an earlier note as less than 10,000, but he subsequently gave me some data that it would be $12,550. However, fire department will still be doing pre-insurance inspections, plan reviews for the ETJ. So there's still work to do there, but there's not a significant revenue decline as a result of the ETJ. Police and animal protection services. No revenues are associated with the ETJ regarding police. Community relations. There will be no impact on the community building revenues as they already charge resident and non-resident rates. Parks and recreation, no impact on parks and recreation revenues. They already charge resident and non-resident rates regardless of ETJ or not. From Lance and Finance, the only fees collected are beer and wine licenses, and that applies only to the city limits. Okay. So, development services. Now, this is the most probable impact. So I was watching this closely as part of the fiscal impact study. So we compared the total number of inspections over several years, not just the most recent year, with those inspections that were done in the ETJ area. So here's the data. Inspections completed per fiscal year. FY 23-24, in the ETJ 360, but there was a total of 4,314. So that's only, the ETJ is only 8% of inspections. So maybe that was an anomaly. So we're looking at more than 1 year. 22-23, similar number, 364, but the total went up, 5,207, so the percentage dropped to 7%. In FY 21 and 22, excuse me, a similar number of inspections, 351, of a total 4,461, again, around 8%, okay? So the percentage of ETJ workload inspections for total inspections seems to be about 8% or less, all right? So, you know, this is data, and data tell a story, and this is the story that they're telling. Okay, so revenue from the ETJ inspections and permitting. Let's do the same analysis, fiscal year 21-22. The amount of ETJ inspection and permitting revenue, 32,444. The total is 584,959. So the revenue in 21-22 was 6%. Coming from the ETJ as a percentage of all inspections and permitting. Everybody with me on the handout?
Stuart, can I ask you a question
Sure.
at this point? These numbers are based on the past year's inspections. Maybe I have a different recollection than what actually happened, but we staffed up. We hired people because we projected out that we were going to build out. There's 1,900 acres in that area. So because we staffed up in anticipation of that build out, these numbers do not reflect that. If you were to build it all out under the current zoning, under our current zoning, not the county's current zoning, there'd be a lot more inspections going on because of the 1,900 acres. If we had not staffed up in anticipation of continuous growth, that the way that's done, I think would be more spot on. But I'm concerned the fact that we staffed up and we're not going to have that 1,900 acres anymore. Plus, we have that 6%.
Right, but regardless of the level of staffing, I think what the data are showing is no matter how many staff you have, the number of inspections only are about 7 or 8% of the workload, regardless of how many staff you have.
No. That's based on how many houses are in ETJ now.
Correct.
I'm saying you got 1,900 acres that has not been built out. We staffed up, I think it's 1,500, but the papers keep saying 1,900. Whatever the number is, it's a big number. We staffed up in anticipation of constant growth. And we're not going to have that constant growth. So your 6% is only based on what's there today, not what we staffed up for tomorrow, which was the 1,500 or 1,900 acres. If you built that all out, your ETJ numbers would be dramatically higher.
That's correct. That's correct. This is historical data. It's not, I'm going to get to projections about the future in a minute. And we're going to have to watch truly, as you say, the staffing and as it plays out. My point is, historically, here's what the ETJ impact has been on total inspections. And here's what the ETJ revenues have been. What it will be in the future, had it continued on its current track, sure, it would have gone up. It would have been a higher percentage. Now that it's gone, the question I'm trying to answer with staff is, well, with the ETJ gone, boom, right away, how much revenue, regardless of future development, can we expect to lose? And how much workload will we lose? The data are showing that we'll lose about $35,000 out of almost $600,000. Yes, projected revenue, I see your point. I'm just talking about what we've got now. This is
Yeah,
historical.
but once again, we staffed up for that
Yeah.
projected revenue
Right.
and projected workload.
Right.
And so since we don't have that, the
Uh-huh.
real hardball question is
Uh-huh.
the FTEs that we should have working tomorrow.
Right. I'm going to get to that in a second. But what I think we take it one step at a time. I'm trying to understand what the ETJ's impact is right now.
Yes.
In the next week, in the next 6 months to a year. Okay, so if you extrapolate this data, both the workload and the revenues, we're looking at, in the next year, a 6% loss in workload and revenue. But if you look at the data holistically, total inspections are 600,000, bringing in almost 600,000. So we're losing right away about 35 to 40,000. Okay? I understand your point. The future, staffing up for future development is always interesting because economic forecasts can change. But let me finish and I think I'll get to your point. Okay, so let's take a look at the planning side of things, not the inspection. Look at the application type. This is data over 19 months, January 23rd to July 24th over the last 19 months. Special use permits in the city limits, there were 16 and 2 in ETJ. City limits revenue was $12,000 coming from those plan review. ETJ was $1,500, ETJ's 13%. Variances, 8 in the city, 1 in ETJ. $4,000 raised, ETJ 500, 13%. Map amendments, 1 in the city, 3 in ETJ. $750 in the city, $2,250 in the ETJ. ETJ is more than the city here by 3 to 1. Major site plans, interestingly, in the last 19 months, 4 in the city, none in the ETJ. Subdivisions, 3 in the city, 0 in the ETJ. So plan review funds are about $27,650. ETJ revenue is about $4,300. So the ETJ, as far as plan review, is about 16%. Okay? So that's really only $4,300 from the ETJ. And the majority is still coming from the city. Understand your point about the future, but this is up to today and what we can expect immediately.
Well, just
Yeah.
to clarify, the major site plans and subdivisions, this is not accurate because those were annexed into the city, but they were in the ETJ. We've had subdivisions that were in the ETJ before they were annexed, that were both major site plans and subdivisions.
Osprey Landing, I think, is one, right? Then there was.
Yeah.
So the three subdivisions that are here is the Prices Creek Phase 2, that is been in the city for years. It was Oakton, which is now the Waters, that was in the city limits. And then, yes, Turtle Bay, which was, but has now been annexed in. So those were the 3 that were.
And under major site plans, are there none that were in the ETJ
There were
that were
none.
annexed?
No.
Okay, so your point is well taken. The question is the data, what do they say about today, and then what can we use to extrapolate for the future? Because we have to staff not just for the immediate, but for anticipated development. So, good question. We asked our comprehensive plan consultant, Stewart, to identify properties remaining in the city limits to be developed. There are about 500 properties still available. This equates to about 250 acres of vacant and unconstrained land. Does not include areas that could be considered underutilized and are likely to be redeveloped, which could be another 100 to 200 acres. Additionally, this does not account for redevelopment of existing properties or urban infill. And we're seeing a lot of that now. Okay, so what subdivisions are approved already and being developed in the city that will require permitting and inspection? We have, going forward, Osprey Landing, 196 units total, but being annexed and developed in phases. The Waters, formerly Oakton, is 42 units. Jonas Creek, Phase 3, is 31 units. Price's Creek Phase 2, 48 units, multifamily. Turtle Bay is 100 units. That's just what's on the books. Okay, so the data, again, I'm trying to be as unbiased as I can be. If I see drastic ETJ impact, I would certainly tell y'all. I think that right away we would need to make drastic changes. But what the data are showing to me at this time is that the ETJ workload financial loss is not that significant at this time. It's about 6 to 8%. And in the scope of things, it's not a major revenue impact. Given all the approved projects and subdivisions, there will likely be enough work in permitting, inspections, and planning right now in the pipeline to maintain our current staffing levels. This is before the new urban infill and redevelopment projects, which we expect to come down the road, happens. All right. So, I hear what you're saying. What the future will foretell with the loss of the ETJ, all I can do from the historical data is try to forecast the future. And at this stage, I think it's premature to really make any significant changes, because if things continue at the pace they have the last 3 years, my point is that the funds are still self-sustaining. The building inspection, 6% of the total revenue it raises is almost equal to the department costs right now, even with the 6% loss. So that department is still sustaining, almost self-sufficient, just about 6%, $35,000 loss. Now I'm going to watch that trend and see if those numbers continue to hold, but I'm just trying to base decisions on a rational understanding of what's happening now, and then trying to look ahead and then watch it over the next 3 to 6 months and see that there's a big drop-off. I hope that makes sense.
I just want to make sure I point out that, so there's 250 acres that are still left to be developed, and I understand some lots can be enhanced and redeveloped. That's only 1/6 of the total number of acres that we were expecting to have contact with. Because ETJ, I'm going to just use the 1,500 acres number because that's what COG figured out. I don't know where the 1,900 number came from. I'll go with the 1,500. But that's 1/6. So it just seems to me that there is, since we're projecting over the horizon, which was a good thing. I mean, we should have been doing that. Projecting over the horizon, we have to make sure that we're looking at the workload. What workload do we have? From everything from, I'm not overly concerned about building inspections at this time. I think we're going to have enough building inspections for quite some time with any luck. But I'm thinking about code enforcement. That whole 1,900 acres is gone. We don't do anything up there anymore. And so those are the jobs that I'm looking at. So I just
okay.
want to make sure, one of the fundamental things, I know my words sound like I'm trying to get rid of employees. At this moment, the county is hiring in those positions. So if we go down that road too much further, and then we have to RIF somebody, that job opportunity may not be there. That's my concern. My concern, actually, regardless of what my words may have sounded like, is that I don't want anybody to be unemployed. And so I truly mean that. This board, and even the board before that, worked diligently to make sure that when we reduced our numbers for the water sewer people, they had a place to go. So this is not like a Rich Alt thing, this is a whole board thing. I just want to make sure that if we end up having to RIF people, we give them the opportunity they wouldn't even have to move if they went to the county. So that's in the back of my head.
Understand your concern. You know, I'm here to run a business. We take the taxpayer money, we return a service. If the revenues and expenses don't align, I'll be the first to tell you. I just don't see it at this stage. And you mentioned code enforcement. We're about to talk about a major code enforcement endeavor soon that will require significant code enforcement. So that's on the agenda tonight. I'm going to watch this data. Right now, I just think it's premature. When the clock struck, then all I have to go on is not a crystal ball, but what's happened in the last 3 years. And I'll extrapolate over the next year and say that trend will continue. The dynamic, the inertia of it's going to continue, and then we'll have to keep looking as the data starts speaking, and I'll keep watching it. But my job is to make sure that we're staffed to the right level, and I think we are, to support what taxpayer needs are. I'll be the first to say if I see a difference.
Is there any questions from the board?
At what point in time down the road is an ouch moment for you where you say, okay, now I've got to make a bad decision? Just, again, this is just strictly a wild guess, but at what point in time when you say, I've got to make a move now?
Yeah, again, I come from a budget background. I'll watch the data every quarter, and if I see a trend, I'll say something. But my job is to watch the data as it is and be realistic that where we're staffed now is correct until we have more data. I'm not going to guess at the data. I will look at it quarterly, and we'll keep going. But I think there's enough projects backed up. How many years are we talking about for Turtle Bay and all these that were just a couple of years down the road? Well, yeah, but yeah, there's work backed up, and we just don't know. You know, the truth is the dynamic here that I see. We're seeing the retirement of the baby boom generation. I run into people everywhere I go that just moved here, retired here, buying homes here, redeveloping, buying homes and fixing them up. The real estate market is not going to decline, in my opinion, if there's a recession because of this, the retirement of the baby boom generation. People want to live at the coast. I just don't see building at the coast declining, and that requires staff. Until I see more evidence, that's the way I'm seeing it.
Thank you, Stuart.
If there's no, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I think the ETJ fiasco has got us all upset. We're looking at the worst case scenario, and there might not be a worst case. We're going to deal with it. You established your point with your data collection and all, and we'll see what happens over this year.
Right.
This 400 homes is a lot of homes to service, so we've got plenty of work ahead of us in the short term.
Right, this is a baseline, and I'll watch it. As I say, I just think we're staffed at the correct level right now, where we need to be, and then we'll just continue to monitor the situation.
Any other comments from the board? Thank you, sir. Okay, the next discussion is, Mo, you're back up again. The reason why we're having this discussion is to make it public about what has commonly been referred to as the clear cutting on Fodell, and what that actually means, and what happened, and why, how, what is going to happen in the future.
Yes, sir, thank you. So, the Waters at Southport is the new name for the former Oakton subdivision, and they were granted their preliminary plat approval by the Board of Aldermen at your June 8th meeting in 2023. So this is the site plan. This is an approximate 20-acre property that is developed into 42 single-family lots. It's R10 zoning with 10,000 square foot lots. Approximately 3 acres of open space is being proposed, and there will be 2,935 inches of canopy and understory trees that will be planted for mitigation. This is a picture of the tree survey showing the existing trees that were there previously. This mitigation, and I wanted to make sure that everyone understood that mitigation is required only for regulated or specimen trees, so it would be any hardwood over 8 inches in diameter at breast height, 12 inches of coniferous trees at breast height, or any tree that's over 30 inches anywhere on site. And then you'd have to have your tree permit and mitigation for that. So you can kind of see where the patterns of the growth are located on this map. This is the tree removal plan that was provided as part of the requirement for the preliminary plat, as well as for the tree permit. The mitigation is going to be 1-for-1 for removal from any of the trees, regulated trees from the setbacks, or specimen trees. So the tree ordinance at the time that was in effect did not have a couple of the specifications that are existing in the ordinance now. So at the time, you only had to have the mitigation for the removal from the setbacks for those regulated trees. And also for the grading and infrastructure removal, you only had to do mitigation of live oaks. Today, if a subdivision comes through, and you will see this at your next meeting when Turtle Bay comes for their preliminary plat, they still have to do the mitigation 1-for-1 within the setbacks, and the grading is the same for the live oaks within the infrastructure section, but you have to, 80% of the lot must remain undisturbed before the development. So they will be able to come in, do their grading, install their infrastructure, but each permit will then have to remove trees as only necessary for the lot itself. So that is the new provision that would keep it from getting completely clear cut to allow the grading. So you'll have to use the existing topography of the land so that you can get that taken care of. So that is the tree plan. So this is the, again, the landscape and tree mitigation plan that was shown previously. And it was shown that they retained 3,695 inches. And you can see those clusters around the perimeter of the subdivision. Yes, around all of the lots they were cut. They were able to do that, unfortunately. But they did retain 3,695 inches around the perimeter. And as I spoke, they were going to be doing 2,935 inches of mitigation. So that is what happened, how we are, and here we are. And moving forward, we are hopeful and feel very comfortable that the ordinance that we have now will take care of this type of situation.
Questions from the board?
Do you want questions
Go
or
ahead.
comments? That'll be,
Well, either, but Mark goes first.
yes.
So all of this area is historically was a tree farm. It's all very low growth pine. Mr. Flythe lives on the corner and backs up to this, and there weren't a lot of trees that were really even alive in this section. There were a lot of dead trees in this whole section that they cleared out. It was a wasteland, to be honest. So that section's a tree farm, and behind Cape Fear Drive, tree farm. You know what you do with tree farm? You cut trees, historically. So these areas have been traditionally nothing but pine trees. I'm surprised that you had 1/4 of your trees were actually hardwood trees. They more than likely were not large.
Thanks for taking the time to, yeah.
I appreciate the fact that you brought this out, because I've certainly been hearing a lot from the public who are just appalled and are wondering why they're accusing us of hypocrisy. We say we love trees, we're trying to protect trees, and then we let this happen. We didn't let it happen. We passed an ordinance that deals with this, and it very effectively does, and takes into account the value of trees in preventing drainage problems. Trees take up an enormous amount of water and are a major way of preventing flooding. But the problem is, we got that stricter tree protection ordinance passed after they had already put in their application. And I didn't see this until a few weeks ago, and I actually wanted to throw up when I saw what had happened there. And thank God we have this ordinance. It's not just because we think trees are pretty and like them. They really are valuable to the city. And, you know, when they were before us and we were really trying to prevent some of this, but the law was on their side at that point, I was thinking that the name Oakton was truly ironic, and probably the most ironic name I'd heard for a subdivision. But I was wrong, because they've changed it, and now it's the Waters. And if that's not irony, I don't know what is.
Mo, I have a couple of questions. The chart that you're looking at, the little circles, are they the trees that are going to be replanted?
Yes, that is correct.
All right, and if I'm looking at the two numbers, the total number of trees that were retained is 3,700. And the total number of trees that have to be replaced is that 2,900 or 20?
Yes, 2,900.
So if somebody wanted to get in their head what that should look like, if they took all the trees that are around the border, mostly, they would replant that same number of trees. It's actually going to be more trees than that, because the trees they're going to plant are smaller in diameter, and they have to make up 2,900 inches. But there's a fair number of trees, as you can see on this. I was hoping, and he may be on watching us live stream, that the local paper would be here to take all this in. It wouldn't be in a story for obviously tomorrow, but it would be potentially a story for next week. So I would ask the staff, I asked the manager, that if we could reach out to Bob Lipka and just make sure that he has all the facts for this in case he wants to write a story, so the rest of the world knows why it happened, what happened, and how it's going to be mitigated. Any other questions or comments from the board? Mo, thank you very much. All right, next up is an update on bread and breakfast events permit. And again, the mistress of ceremonies.
Thank you. At the Board of Adjustments last meeting in July, the regular meeting, they heard an application for a special use permit for a bed and breakfast. And bed and breakfasts are allowed with a special use permit and standards in R10 zoning. So this was in an R10 zoning. The application must include a detailed management plan that includes all of the different management aspects of the business itself. And one of those for this particular use was to include events on their outdoor space. They have a large backyard that they wanted to include special events. And there is nothing in the UDO now that it addresses how to consider these special events with the bed and breakfast, except in the management plan itself. So the Board of Adjustments granted the approval of the bed and breakfast, but not the event portion of this special use permit, and asked that they would come back with a separate special use permit for the events themselves only, so that they could look at this for very site-specific considerations and add conditions and look at definitions of what they really mean. So that was what happened, and we were asked to bring some information about bed and breakfast this evening, just to kind of have some discussion of what is and isn't allowed. I would like to say that previously, the last bed and breakfast that was approved by the Board of Adjustments, they do allow special uses at theirs, and it was also within their management plan when it was approved. So that was La Polina on River Drive. Yeah.
Conditions. I would like to see those
I
conditions.
I did not find any conditions, but I know that was in their management plan, and that was the, I will look for the full minutes, but I don't believe there were any conditions. It was approved with no conditions.
I'm sorry, Mo, could you say that sentence again for me?
Yes. So the last bed and breakfast that requested the same, they were approved with no conditions from the Board of Adjustments with the same management plan that had these events requested.
So they're allowed to have the events, are you telling me?
This is a separate property. So
Right.
just, yes, they are.
Okay.
Which is kind of insane, considering that is predominantly a residential neighborhood.
I don't know how that they should have been granted the ability to have events there, because when I go to the, I appreciate we just have 3 conditions for bed and breakfast, but we rely on the state document for some of this regulation, and it clearly says bed and breakfast inn means no more than 12 guest rooms. It offers bed and breakfast accommodations, blah, blah, and then it goes on A, B, and C, D. B, serves only breakfast meal, and that meal is served only to overnight guests of the business, includes the price of breakfast and the room rate. So this idea that these are event venues, to me, that's a wholly separate business and a wholly separate use. And I think that was a mistake, but one mistake doesn't mean that's how we roll forward, and there's no precedent set by some variance. So I certainly, even when you go to our other ordinances, homestay and short-term rentals, homestays are allowed in residential areas. We make a specific statement: no activities other than lodging shall be provided. Special events, including weddings, receptions, and other large gatherings, are expressly prohibited, because that is a different kind of business than just a bed and breakfast where you're housing people with somebody on site and giving them breakfast. So this, for me, I'm having a little bit of a fundamental problem, and it goes back, if you drop down as an example in the UDO under D, where it says business, commercial, and other non-residential uses. This is in the packet that you gave us, and it talks about variance and promote the general health and safety and welfare of those around them. I want to, and this is really a Brady question. Brady, I feel like in a case of a variance that the city, we have standing because correct me if I'm not going down this thread correctly, but it would seem to me that the city would have standing when someone asked to for a variance to our ordinance.
So I don't think
No, it's not on. It's not.
So I don't think this is a variance, because you can't have a variance to change the use
with special use
special use permit.
Okay.
It's an interesting question. So you're talking about at the actual Board of Adjustment. Well, I don't know if I've ever been brought that before. That's an interesting, I mean, I think there's a good argument that you would have standing, but regardless, you could go and argue to the Board of Adjustment that you're here to go and testify as a witness as opposed to actually being a party to that, if that makes sense.
Right.
Yeah.
My question would be, for special use permits, that, to me, this goes far afield from what a bed and breakfast is by the definition in this document, which is the state, which is also in our ordinance. So de facto, this applies to us, right? Because it says compliance with bed and breakfast, section 2200, North Carolina Administrative Code, Title 10. So that's what this document is, and it's in our ordinance. So I would assume we can extrapolate that this applies to ours. So, but I guess what I'd like to see is somehow an awareness also with variances, an awareness that the city is aware of what is happening at the Board of Adjustment, so we then can have representation there to have, if we have concerns, or that I'm a little bit bothered that there's no conditions on something that you're saying really, it seems to me to be in conflict with this. So that.
Yeah, I was going to say the good news is if stuff starts repeating as it has, right, you guys can go and put it out in front by making those regulations. But yeah, I don't think there's anything, I'd say there's a good argument that representation from you all can happen at a quasi-judicial hearing. Yep.
And that would be you?
Yeah, it could be me, or it could be a representative from the board, theoretically. Yep. Or both. Yep.
The Board of Adjustment had legal representation actually for this meeting, and he was stumped as to the precedent. So what has really happened here is these people are honest. They have lost the trick to being a local. Do it and don't ask, because that's what everybody else is doing. Doing it and not asking. We have no criteria for what an event is. Can you have an event in your house? Can you have a birthday party with 100 people?
As a private citizen, I can do anything. As the owner of that property, if they're having a private party, they can do not anything, of course, but you know what I mean. This is about running it as a business. It's not the same thing as, living next door to a venue that's being utilized as a venue in a residential neighborhood is a very different conversation than me having a party 2 or 3 times a year.
I live next to an Airbnb that's had funerals, weddings, graduations. They have events all the time.
Well, it's illegal based on our ordinance.
But we have, so again, with our fire chief here, can we have 100 people in a birthday party in a house? Is that legal? Yes, sir. Are you working tonight?
You cannot enforce the fire code on a residential property.
Well, I'd like to say that, first of all, La Polina
Cool. Thank you.
has been around a long time. I don't know exactly when they got their special use permit, but it's been as long as I've lived here. And so
2016.
the the short-term rentals ordinance was passed, 4 years ago, 3 years ago? The thing I'm concerned about is not having a friend's wedding in my backyard or something like that. I am concerned about the corruption and degrading of residential neighborhoods by having something like this within the neighborhood. This is what we've been trying to prevent with short-term rentals, Airbnbs, and this, frankly, as they described it to the Board of Adjustment, is a functioning business, an events business in a residential neighborhood.
This is across the street from where we're sitting right now.
Do we not control the number of cars that you can have on site? If you got 50 people and 50 people show up with a car, where are we gonna put them?
Since this isn't a use in the UDO, there isn't a requirement or a standard for parking, but the bed and breakfast itself has to have one space per unit that they're renting.
That's what I thought.
So basically, if they were having a big commercial event, there would be parking all over the streets, right? Okay.
Alderman Kelly, were you going to say something?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I feel like this discussion went in a direction I wasn't expecting, and I have a conflict and cannot contribute.
Well, I'd like to propose that we ask staff to draft for us language to present to the planning board to consider an amendment to the UDO regarding bed and breakfast, to define exactly what an event is, what limitations and regulations there would be on any events if allowed.
So you're making that as a motion, ma'am?
Yes.
Is there a second to that motion? There's a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Other than we do have to actually take a moment, and we all have to agree about, is there a conflict by our rules? So for Alderman Kelly, I would suggest that we agree with her that there's a conflict and she should stay out of the conversation. But that's up to the rest of you.
Well, what's the conflict?
We'll make a
You're supposed
motion
say what
to,
the conflict is.
don't we just need to make a motion to recognize that she's...
Yes, we have to do that before we go any further down the line of voting on anything.
Oh, well, we've already got a motion on the table, though.
Well,
Can we?
can you withdraw your motion for a minute?
It's low.
Do what?
Just withdraw your motion
Just withdraw temporarily.
just for the moment. And I would entertain a motion to acknowledge Alderman Kelly's conflict.
So move.
As a motion and a second, any comment?
Yes. Yes, I believe that when we ask to be recused for conflict, that we're supposed to say what the conflict is. Am I correct, Brady?
I mean, I would just say enough that whoever has the potential conflict or a conflict, enough to go and explain that they're comfortable with. I need to look through the rules of procedure real quick to see if it specifies anything more.
I don't want to put Alderman Kelly on the spot, but
I don't-
typically we've done that.
I don't mind. I own a 16-room hotel in Southport in the commercial business district. Talking about events at potentially competing properties could be a conflict for me.
All right.
Any other comment? All in favor of allowing Rebecca to abstain from this, say aye. Any opposed? It's done. Now, Alderman Davis, if you want to restate your motion.
Yes, would the city clerk read that?
Your motion was to instruct staff to bring back language to amend the UDO for the requirement of events, to define events and what limitations around those events would be with regard to bed and breakfasts.
Yeah, and then, to send that to the planning board, and the planning board will get it to us. We do, that doesn't say that we're going to agree with it or adopt it, but to start the ball rolling on this.
Okay, that's the motion. I'm going to ask for a second again. As a motion and a second, any discussion? All in favor of the motion as stated, please say aye and raise your hand.
Aye.
Any opposed? It moves forward. Thank you.
Well, I just would like to go back to the idea of having our attorney or city attorney or some type of representation at the Board of Adjustment meetings when it comes to this type of stuff. I mean, things are getting passed, obviously without condition somehow, that we just want to make sure that that doesn't continue. So we should try to make it a best practice of this board to have representation there for things that are important.
I would agree with you, and I would even go one step further. I have no idea whether or not there's classes at the School of Government, but I was thinking about this both for the Board of Adjustment. Who's on? The Board of Adjustment and for the Planning Board, that we as a board encourage them to take additional training if there is such. And I would ask the manager to help us.
Yeah, Mayor, may I? I know I've been in talks with, and it might have been Bonnie at the time, or maybe it was planning staff, but I think for the last year, we've sort of been in the works. At some point, I was going to go and do like a formal quasi-judicial training. I mean, we do those all the time. And, you know, I don't really like to do them like every year, but with some of my boards, I'll do it like once, and then like 3 years later, I'll do one. But I think we're at that point. I think that got lost a little bit in the wind with the ETJ stuff that happened over the last couple months. But I'd be happy to go, and I mean, you guys just sort of pick a date, time frame, Mo, when that would go and work, maybe before December and the end of the year or something like that, sometime.
Could we do it, I'm trying to cut your days from driving down here.
Sure.
Work it around, this meeting, like maybe the day after,
Yeah, that actually makes sense.
see if that would help out.
Yeah.
And
But
when
you're-
you do the training, it would be, the public could attend, right?
Yeah, it would have to be a formal meeting. Yeah, always open to the public.
But this wouldn't negate the fact that in certain circumstances, we want you there representing the city against this type of approval.
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to.
A final request, I'm sorry, Mo. Our website includes the agenda for the Board of Adjustment for variances and special uses, which is pretty much all they hear. I'd really like to have the actual application included on the website. I want to see
The other thing too, and I don't know how we do this logistically, but it's one thing to have representation there, and it's another thing to have the representation understand what our consensus is. So I don't know how the timing of everything. I know that is the Board of Adjustment the fourth week of the month, and so when do you know, calendar-wise, how far out are you establishing a calendar? The agenda.
Applications must be in at least 1 month prior to the meeting itself.
So there's an opportunity that you could put all of that in our packet so we could review it and have discussion.
Yes.
And then my question, this is a Brady question, is this the kind of discussion that we would have to have in closed session with you versus because I think there's I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if that would include a privilege with that or not.
I mean, in an ideal world, that probably would be best, and that could be possible. It would just me, attending closed sessions like I sort of have with that first or second regular meeting. That might give us enough time. And if need be, there's other ways. I'll leave it at that. And then if in a bind, there's other ways that you guys can relay that information to me while preserving the open meeting laws and all that, attorney-client privilege. Yep.
Is this coming back at the end of August? Is that when? It's not on your agenda for August? Okay.
I have a clarification question. When the Board of Adjustment is opining on things, do they have to care what we think? Or do they only have to look at the statutes that are there? Our opinions, I wouldn't think they have to look at what I think, as opposed to, they only have to look at what we've already done and as far as codes say and what the state codes say.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, again, it's applying substantial competent material evidence to the standards in the ordinance for the special use permanent. It's decreased property values, harmony with the general area. I mean, with conditions that can get, I'm just going to be honest, it can kind of get loosey-goosey. It just has to be reasonable towards, reasonable conditions to the property and the use. But I will have to go and say, I mean, you all can go and appeal that decision to Superior Court. I mean, that's certainly happened before. So there's always that, like, worst-case scenario. But you're right, Mayor. I mean, it's their call. It's their final call, and then it's the court's job to, determine whether that was a valid decision on appeal.
So for this particular, just so everybody knows where I'm standing on this, I'm actually in agreement that these are two different companies, two different company actions that need to be separated. One, I'm having a bread and breakfast, which all the requirements for that, and if I want to be an event place, then I have to apply and go through all the hoops to go through that. So right now, I think the Board of Adjustment did the right thing because they kicked it back, didn't they? So they did the right thing on this one. Yeah, I just want to make sure that we all understand it. We have to be really precise going forward with our UDOs. And when we see something that's not there, that's not good, just because we thought it was good at the time, now it's not, we may have to tighten our timeline up for fixing things. Because we've been talking about fixing the UDO since I was elected alderman, and we still haven't gotten there yet. So there's a lot of things we have to tighten up on, because they're going to use that as the basis of what decisions they're going to make, rightfully so.
Another request from Mo. Will you make sure that the Board of Adjustment knows that we've clarified that alderman and city attorney have standing? That's the first thing the chairman's going to say when somebody gets up to speak, to establish.
I'm going to make an argument that we have standing, that whether they say we do or not, that's not my call. But I'm going to preface that, right? Okay, all right.
So to have standing, none of us independently have that authority to go, and I show up and I said, hey, I'm the mayor, I got standing. It would have to be a vote to whoever we're going to send, if we're going to send anybody, to be that spokesperson. I want to make sure that we're clear on that. We just don't wander in there. Okay.
And just remember, just because one cannot go and show or prove that they will suffer special damages, that's the standard typically, doesn't mean that we can't go and request to go and testify as a witness. And what that means is presenting some sort of evidence. We just couldn't go and do things like call witnesses, call experts, and cross-examine. But a lot of, and it's well, I'll leave it at that, but usually it's rare for them to say, well, nobody can speak on it. Yeah.
Any other comments, questions? Thank you, ma'am. And Noah, do you feel comfortable you got it? Thank you, sir.
And I will say that in the past, I know for variance, I'm not sure about special use permit, but for variance, we have had representation at the Board of Adjustment and brought in attorneys to represent us during a variance.
We had someone there because the tree fine, I believe, that got extended. So they did have their representation. And I am the liaison. I'm in the hot seat on this one again. I'm the trouble child, I guess. But my opinion is that I don't sit there and persuade that board in any direction with my individual opinion. I wanted to get up and shout during this meeting, but I did not. So I believe we got to stand back and let them have their autonomy and make the decision that we appoint them to do. If you don't like how they're doing it, then we need to appoint different people.
Okay, moving on to the next subject, which is H4, right-of-way. And now you back up again, ma'am.
All right. Thank you very much again. This is some clarification. Staff would like to have a discussion with the board for this right-of-way enforcement. Since the ordinance was adopted in May. We just wanted to make sure that there are clarification and we can be consistent with moving forward with all properties. So we know that the amendment was made in May of '24, that all existing hardscapes must be removed within 72 hours of being noticed by code enforcement. Existing vegetative encroachments can stay and can be replanted if necessary. And on newly developed properties, only grade level turf grasses can be installed with no new vegetation or hardscapes. And that's going to be obstructions of public right-of-way, talking about, that's going to be 16.8. Is that the right one you're speaking of?
16.8A is where you're talking, it's 1610A is where the 72 hours is. Is that what you're talking
Yes,
about?
that's the 72 hours, that's correct.
But that, I think that was old language.
It is, but
It
it's
is old
still,
language. I understand that it's in it,
Yes,
but
it's-
I think part of our, I'm just leaping into this. Do you want to?
I don't believe that lower statement's accurate. And I apologize if I'm mistaken. I thought we were allowing people to plant vegetation within 10 feet of trees in the right of way.
that was part of the confusion, because in the one sentence that is also going to be into the UDO, where it says nothing can be above the horizontal plane of the ground, it says only turf grasses are allowed. And then further down, it states that you can place vegetation or other structures around trees for the protection of the trees from cars. So that was one issue that we were going to be bringing up, because that, it is saying two separate things.
Well, so if I have the forestry committee plant 2 live oaks in the right of way, then technically I could plant within 10 feet of those newly planted live oaks, correct?
That's what, yes, please let me know, because that's
I
why
can
I'm
answer all the questions. Just call me. We don't need everybody else here.
Well, there are a lot of things that was
well,
very confusing when you read it.
I appreciate that may seem confusing. The reason the installation of turf grass on grade was in the right-of-way, why that was added, is because of staff's confusion of whether to allow grass. I don't see that overall as an overall statement of what's allowed in any way conflicting with the 10 feet. So, if Brady, if you need some different language that clarifies that for you, then perhaps you could bring us that language. But I did not see those as a conflict, because they're two different subjects.
I believe that Forestry Committee has consistently said that the way to protect the trees is mulch, not planting things that take away the nourishment and the water for the trees. And so I don't know why we have this 10-foot thing in there.
It ultimately keeps people from driving over the collar roots and other things. That's why. In the end of the day, it will protect the tree.
But can we keep that on a horizontal plane?
What? Right. It creates a barrier that protects the trees. If you go around and look at a lot of our trees, they have, I'm going to just say azaleas around them, a ring of azaleas around them. That keeps people from driving up on the collar roots and banging into the trees, that kind of thing. If people want to do that, but that's why it's there.
This doesn't prohibit irrigation installation into the right of way.
It doesn't even mention irrigation. So to me, it would, because that is something that you're including in is that a hardscape? I mean, these are the types of hard things that people are coming to us asking, can I put my perennials in my front yard, even though my front yard's the right of way? Can I plant the tulips I want? Like those types of things. And if there's vegetation is allowed. That's wonderful. I think that's where it became confusing because you're saying turf grass is the only thing, then it says existing vegetation gets to stay, but really you are allowed to add vegetation. So is that the clarification we're getting?
And I think we always intended for irrigation because it's below the horizontal plane for irrigation to exist.
I'm sorry. I've been lost on this topic since the day we started it.
How many times have we discussed it?
So my question is, the people that want to put tulips in, which is going to be taller than the grass, if it's back beyond the 10-foot line, are they allowed to do this under the current rules or not? So it's strictly grass, nothing else, no flowers, no nothing in the entire right-of-way.
10 foot from what?
Well, I thought it was some distance from the street back. So you cannot have a flower in your front yard if you have that 90-foot buffer thing going on.
It's not your front yard.
And this says on the first paragraph, I want to make sure we're going to clearly state that this board, not this person, this board says that anything that's in the right-of-way, hardscape, once the guy drops the notice on you, you got 72 hours to get it out of there. Fences, cement walls, 1950, don't care. Everything's coming out. And we're prepared to do that.
I think that was left as a leftover artifact from the original ordinance. So when we talked about enforcement of the ordinance, I go back to a document that we were given in February of 23, and we brought this up when we were talking about adopting this, and it says in this document, in the case of existing right-of-way encroachment, staff recommends the establishment of a grace period not to exceed 6 months in order for citizens of the city to remove encroachments from the city's right-of-way that violate updated ordinance language. So we brought this up when we did this. We talked about referring back to this.
I remember the conversation.
Right. So if that's an amendment we need to make in the Code of Ordinances, then I would, I'm not sure. That's something that staff will need to direct us on, because that refers to new ordinance, new encroachments. You want
all
people.
Existing hardscape.
I understand, but how we think of it is that this language about the 6 months, I don't know if that's something that you need to codify in the ordinance, or is this a policy? This is a Brady question. If it states that in the ordinance, then we must need to have as the adoption date of this going forward at 6 months.
It's essentially, I think the 6 months is more of like a moratorium to bring it into compliance.
Right.
I'm going to have to just discuss a little bit with staff on what makes the most sense, because what I don't want to go and happen is in 8 months we have that in there. I mean, I guess we could always do a text amendment to go and remove it once, all the enforcement is in place of what was existing before that needed, and then from here on out we can do the 72 hours. But something I would just need to go and talk with staff. I'm just hesitant to it to be a policy, because then people can't go and find it and they're going to go and say, I had no idea, right? So I think worst case scenario is we put it in the section of the UDO with this, or excuse me, with the code, and then the UDO, and then in, a year, 8 months, we just go and amend it to go and delete that. Does that sort of make sense? Yeah.
Has anybody tried to
Mr.
get
Mayor.
Has anybody tried to get anybody to do work in 3 days in this area? I mean, this is a hardship for a homeowner to say they have 72 hours to get something taken care of here, unless they are physically going and pulling it out themselves. And when we talk about who our population is, overwhelmingly, that's not who we want out doing it. So we need to definitely consider a different timeline for the encroachments removal, even after they're noticed.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to, I will make a motion on this, but I would like to hear what everybody thinks about this. There are so many conflicting things in this, so many issues that are raised as soon as you look at the details where the devil resides, I would recommend that we ask you to appoint an ad hoc committee to work with the planning director and whoever you appoint to try to resolve all of this and come back with recommendations for those resolutions as soon as we could. I'm willing to make that a motion.
Can I just add one thought on that?
Yeah.
Being new here, I'm watching this debate, and I've watched it since prior to my arrival. I do like that idea because trying to determine the details here, the details should be brought forth in proposals that you can then vote on as options. I think that makes very good sense. And also, there's other cities, towns, I'm sure, who've wrestled with this and have probably developed their own guidelines as benchmarks that you could look at. Thank you.
Stuart, I appreciate that, but we've been working on this for, I don't know, since at least February of '23 by this document. So I do think, Lo, that that's a good idea to do. We can go through these questions with staff and with Brady. An ad hoc committee can do that and then clarify, I guess. But I don't know how much more we can talk about it.
Certainly not here, but, you know, as we find out, every time we talk about it, something pops up and bites us, and that we hadn't thought about, that we hadn't dealt with. You brought up, Mr. Mayor, the historic walls and things like that that go back 50, 60, maybe 100 years. And what are we going to do about those? We need a way of dealing with those. I have not thought about that, but why don't you get this committee to try to iron out
We
all
talked
of
about this, and one of the options that you talked about was we're going to send everybody off to the Board of Adjustment. So you pick a number. You pick a number, and somehow they would have divine intervention to figure out how to do all of this. And based on what? I'm not sure what they would be basing it on, because they're supposed to base it on the law. So if the law says everything has to come out, their decision would have to be everything would have to come out. You can tell from my stance on this that fundamentally I have no idea why we're going to now alienate hundreds of people for something that there's nothing going on. If we need their yard, we'll take it. If we don't need their yard, we just leave it alone. Otherwise, we are just doing things to turn this into one big HOA, and we just got our noses punched. And how many more times are we going to do things that are going to aggravate the citizens when there is no thing that is forcing us to do this? That's my personal opinion. So if you want, but Alderman Davis, if you want to make the motion to do that, please do so, and we'll go through democracy.
And I appreciate, yeah.
I made a motion, I'm waiting for a second.
I appreciate all of this conversation, and we have talked about this. Oak Island, you cannot park in your front lawn, excuse me, not your front lawn. You cannot park in the right-of-way in front of your house. You can't. They don't want you to. They're forcing you to either pay for parking or get your vehicle on your lot. So this is our neighboring town. It's right there. Like, we're not unlike them. They just did it. We've been working on it for over a year. You know, we cannot think of every single scenario that's going to exist. But what we did, and I'm so proud of Alderman Kelly for doing this, is we made a motion and we're moving forward. And so let's go through these things. Let's fix these. There's some photos. I mean, I don't even know what the hell the photos mean, but if we want to talk about them and ask questions, let's do that to see if we can get some clarity and just move forward, is my recommendation.
I don't think that tonight is the right time to try to get all that settled. I think we need to look at, let a committee look at it, come up with what the possible solutions are, and get back quickly. Yes, I feel like we're in the Groundhog Day on this,
More
every,
like the-
over and over and over, but there are areas that are too gray and that we need to address.
It's slightly worse than the street sweeper situation, isn't it?
Wait a minute.
That only came back 3 times.
I'll second Alderman Davis's motion. Discussion?
Yes, ma'am. Now that we have a motion and a second.
I think that there are lots of things that now that this has been in place and people have gone to staff, that questions have come up. I think that having an ad hoc committee to work with staff to work through some of that makes a whole lot of sense rather than us trying to do it here at the table. And then I think once we have, not everything, because there was no way that we will come back with everything figured out, but certainly the things that have come up over and over again with staff, we can provide some clarity, hopefully, and then we as a board with recommendations can then vote on that to make whatever amendments and adjustments need to happen. And just like we said initially, we know that there will be some people that will have to go to Board of Adjustment with this, regardless of what we do and put in place. I don't love the idea that we're gonna try and do something for some of these houses that have had things for 50 years, 60 years, and I think that's part of the conversation that we need to have.
With regard to that, Alderman Kelly, I was going to suggest I had had a conversation with Alderman Davis about the Historic Preservation Commission. Anything that is 50 years or older in the historic district should fall under their purview, and I had written some language for us to consider tonight, but glad to share that at a different time.
Alderman Spencer.
All right, I'll step in here. I like the idea of some of these things that we have, they've been here forever. They are a part of the beauty of our community. In some instances, leave them alone. Now, if it's some sort of a safety hazard, we've got the ability to go in there if we have to do it and tear it up and all that sort of stuff. But why would you want to go in and mess with some of these fences and whatnot of borders? I understand that.
I'm ready now. Go ahead, sir. So, how much more are we going to need to dig up or deal with our right-of-ways? Because, number one, we're not going to be digging up water lines and sewer lines anymore. It's not our problem anymore. After we put our power lines underground, what will we be needing our right-of-ways for?
My motion is simply
part of the town.
to ask the mayor to appoint an ad hoc committee to work with staff, go through all of the unresolved conflicts, confusions, and questions, and come back to the board with proposals for how to deal with this. It's not whether to do anything right now on right-of-way. So that's my current motion, and the motion that is on the floor is yes or no on appointing an ad hoc committee.
So there's a motion on the floor. There's a second. Any more comment? All in favor, say aye and please raise your hand. Aye. All opposed? Okay. Now comes the hard part. No doubt. Yes, so am I putting people on it that all are in favor of one idea? Or how do I spread the ideas out so there's a cross-section of people? That's the hard part.
We're just looking at clarifying language and answering questions. I don't think we're making a decision. The ad hoc
No, but
committee.
you're going to be making recommendations for a decision.
Well, no, be making recommendations for clarifications of things.
Correct.
But that's not necessarily what gets adopted. otherwise, this is an alternative. You have to come up with alternatives. It's not an alternative just to say do nothing, except at the
No,
table.
that's not what I meant. In other words, let's assume we do 3 people, okay?
Or whoever volunteers.
Let's assume we do 3 people, just for my part of the conversation. If I pick you 3, I know exactly whether it's going to be the decision. If I pick these 3, I have no idea what they're doing down here. Oh, please. So first of all, let's go down Alderman Davis's line. Alderman Mosteller says she wants to be on it. Alderman Davis says she wants to be on it. On this side of the table, does anybody want to be on that? Frank does. No, okay. I got it. No, 3. Alderman Mosteller, Alderman Davis, Alderman Lay. Does that meet with everybody's approval? There we go. Opine away. All right, one more. Boards and committee ordinances discussions. Noah, you're up, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, last item on your boards and committees, as you know, several of your boards and committees, and especially the Planning Board and Board of Adjustment, has several ETJ members. With the takeaway of the ETJ, we'll need some direction of how you'd like to structure that going forward. Several different options. We can reduce the ETJ members, just allow the in-city representation to continue. We can also increase the representation. The recommendations we have is moving the Board of Adjustment and Planning Board to 7 in-city representatives and having 1 alternate from the city. So that's staff recommendation for that. There's also some options, especially around the Forestry Committee, where we could do the greater zip code area. So the only ones that are really affected by the change are going to be the Planning Board, Board of Adjustment, Forestry Committee, and Park and Rec. So several options there for you to consider. Staff just needs some direction tonight on how you'd like to proceed. I'll then craft that ordinance and bring it back at your next meeting for final approval. And then with the vacancies, if you get more seats to those boards, or if there's vacancies that occurs, then we'll follow the normal fill-in procedure for that. So just looking to some guidance for you all tonight. Do you want to increase the number of boards since the ETJ members are no longer there, or reduce those altogether?
Yeah, for Parks and Rec, already voted on this and wishes to continue to have 3 members from Ward 1 in the city, of course, 3 members from Ward 2 in the city, and replace the ETJ member with an at-large. Let me just be sure I've got this right. 1 member from any residence, any ward in the Smithville Township of 28461 zip code. And this will keep the structure the same. I have a question for Heather. I don't understand what the any residence in the Smithville Township of 28461 includes. Is that the ETJ? They want to keep an ETJ member?
Yes. Yeah, we're trying to identify that instead of just saying that anybody from the 28461 zip code, because that includes areas like BSL and St. James.
I have a problem with us losing our ETJ and still having representation from somebody outside of the city limits. So I would propose that we do an at-large member within the city limits that could come from either of the, either side of House Street, so to speak. But definitely within the city limits, we do not need representation from the ETJ because they no longer have anything to do with what we do here in Southport.
It's Southport only now.
Yeah, the distinction I would make myself too is that Parks and Recs, in the purpose, in the ordinance, it says recommend new rules and policies and provide guidance governing the operation and et cetera with the parks. So to me, I concur with Alderman Kelly about, just because I think you're making decisions about what's going on within the city limits and it's taxpayer conversation.
How are we doing this? Are we voting on how
So
each committee is, or are we just doing
If you
an
just provide,
amalgamation?
you can make a motion together explaining the way you want it set up tonight, and then I'll bring back the new ordinance next month, and then we'll go through the normal appointment process for any vacancies that occurs as a result.
Well, then I would entertain a motion that all the committees and boards in the city of Southport only contain Southport residents only. And then you would go back and work that out, the other thing?
No, I would not go there. Beautification committee, there are some discrepancies within the committees. For me, beautification, if you go to them, that we're not asking for any changes. They allow, they have a large committee. It's 9 members, and with a minimum of 6 being from the city. The difference with the beautification committee is that it is a work committee, and the possible inclusion of some members outside of city limits helps to serve to increase project participation. They're not really making city decisions. They're implementing cleanups and things like that. So that's why I would ask that the beautification committee is unique in that, and that's why they weren't asking for any changes.
They don't make policy, in other words.
They don't make policy, no. The beautification committee is not a policy. It's not that kind of a committee. They're a project committee. Like, if you read their stuff, I mean, they do things like maintain specific public areas exclusively, including weeding, planting, mulching, pruning, and in some cases painting and staining. And so that's why I would leave them the way they are. With regards to forestry, in addition, they have 7 full members, and we would be having 1 alternate member, but and all of theirs would be coming from the city, but changing the language to be that. And then, just so you know, so also allowing, they have consulting members, so we may want to put some language in there. And consulting members can come from anywhere because they're special for their skills or whatever that are working, but they're not voting members for forestry.
Bottom line, what you've got there's a work crew.
Right. For beautification, for sure. And so anyway, that rather than zip code, I agree though that they're all in the city limits for forestry.
I would also like to throw out the clarification too about cemetery committee. They have a few consulting members as well, so if any language needs to be changed, we need to discuss that as well. Currently, the consulting members are Southport Historical Society, Beautification, and one other. John Smith Cemetery.
So they're full members, voting members. They're not consulting members.
But theoretically, they could not live in the city limits. But I think they're representing organizations that operate in the city limits.
Now, the way we set that up was those 3 organizations had information to contribute about the cemeteries and about operation of cemeteries and, like the Historic Society. And those 3 organizations select from their own membership who they want to have on the cemetery committee. Then there are 4 at-large members who are from within the city. Now, I believe that only one of the organization members, and they're not consulting members, they have votes. So I believe the only one of those that has someone from outside is the representative from beautification. The others are within the city limits. I mean, we could change that ordinance and make the organizations choose from within their membership. I mean, that's something to consider, but consulting members don't vote, which is what forestry has. Generally, those tend to be, I think, either people with, arborist skills, or people who used to be on the forestry committee and had the lack of wisdom to move away. A longtime member moved to BSL and is a consulting member.
I think that we should not have voting members on our committees that do not live in the city of Southport. I think that we would welcome them as consulting members to share their thoughts with our committees, but not to have a vote. And we even see that with 4th of July. I mean, City of Southport sits at the table for the board of 4th of July. We don't have a vote. We can talk about everything we want to, but we are not a voting member of the 4th of July Festival Committee. I think the same needs to be applied across the board.
Perhaps one of you
I
could...
think we need to really go back and look at the cemetery committee then, because if you take away the votes of the 3 organization representatives, then that leaves only 4, and that's an even number, which becomes a problem for both a quorum and for a vote.
It's easier to add another member than to. My question is, of all the localities around here that you've mentioned, Oak Island, St. James, BSL, tell me again, how many organizations can a Southport person be on their organizations? None. None. You can't be there. You have to be a taxpayer to be on the program. And so my suggestion is we send this back to staff with working on what you've heard tonight. I guess I'm entertaining a motion. I'm suggesting a motion that we look at this, that there has to be some kind of compromise. I think part of the compromise may be those people that were elected, that were voting members, are now consultants. If the one board, like cemeteries, needs to have an extra person added to it, we can, with a wave of our hand, do that. But we gotta look at protecting Southport from Southport. Every time I turn around, there's 47 people running an operation around here who are doing things in our city, and most of them don't live here. I'm not going to go into that, but offline I'll tell you about that. So let me change that. I am making a thought here. Now we have to make a motion. Somebody has to make a motion to give direction to staff.
I move that we give direction to staff that each of our boards and committees' voting members should be citizens of Southport. Perhaps we look at adding members to break ties if that's something that we need to do, and then allowing for consulting membership for those who still want to be included and volunteer, and we love to have those volunteers. I'm not discounting those people, but we have to take a real hard look at how we protect Southport. So I guess that's the guidance that I would move for staff.
You're saying keep it at an odd number so you can avoid ties?
Nobody got that?
I got that.
Okay. I know, that was a motion. Now we got to get a second.
I have a question. Okay. For discussion, let's,
All right, we have a motion and a second. Now there's discussion. Alderman Mosteller?
One of the questions I also had was, and this is maybe a Brady question, it has to do with the ABC board. I noticed the ABC board didn't have any language. They're relatively small in language in the ordinance, and they didn't have anything that designated whether or not their board members should be residents within the legal city limits. So I didn't know, since it's a state thing, if there was a reason why that wasn't stated in there or if it was just an oversight.
Well, we could add that now.
I think he needs to check the statute so see.
Well, while the attorney is looking at the statute, I want to clarify that we want to have enough members to break ties and to create a quorum. I mean, some of the boards have trouble getting a quorum.
Sounds like we might need to appoint different members.
This is, I'm just, in the case of beautification, I'm going to go back to that. It has 9 members. It's not like they had an overabundance of members that didn't get put on for this last go-round. So I'm just saying, now we're discrediting 3 members of this potentially.
I'm not discrediting them. I think that they have done fabulous work, but we have lost our ETJ. We can no longer have voting membership outside of City of Southport citizens.
Yeah, they did it by zip code. They had the zip code, and the beautification was different. They had in the zip code.
They can come volunteer, and we love to have them volunteer, and they can sit and share their thoughts, but not to vote.
Excuse me, folks, especially during debates, please make sure you're speaking directly into the microphone. The folks back home are having some difficulty hearing, and I can't turn it up anymore. Thank you.
Well, in this particular, is this a good example of how we should speak into the microphone? So, poster boy. So, this is unique. I think maybe, I don't know if there's another committee that was like beautification. So beautification was not an ETJ requirement, it was a 28461 requirement. So the fact that the I guess I could go along with that one. The ETJ being raped from us is, it really has no effect on this, in my opinion. It was already that way. So it's not specific to the ETJ, where some of the other committees say ETJ members. So maybe I could get behind the beautification because it was a 28461 requirement previously, and again, the ETJ going away had nothing to do with that.
I do think we should have a standard for membership on any of our committees and boards, and that standard should be city residents. With beautification, you know, what is it, 9 members? 9 members? That doesn't preclude the people who would no longer have a vote from participating, being heard, and working.
What about holding office?
Well, of course not.
Well,
I know. Fortunately, the chairman of the beautification
committee lives in the
excellent.
28461 zip code, not in the ETJ. That's who chairs that committee, which I'm not saying specific to that, but if that's the way it's been, and then not holding office, that's the person who's been a huge work person.
Is there, you made the motion, is there a compromise here where we do all the things that you said and we have a one-off for staff to come back with suggestions for beautification?
I amend my motion for all of the other committees, with the exception of beautification, where staff would come back with perhaps a different recommendation for that particular committee.
So since the motion has been amended, are you still seconding it, Alderman Davis?
Yes, I am.
Is there any more discussion on the topic?
All right.
Yes. I think that as long as we're looking at this way and looking hard at it, a question that comes to my mind is, why is beautification a city committee? As a 501c3, for example, they could do whatever, and they don't get much funding from us, as far as I know, but we do give funding to some 501c3s. So if we took them out of the mix, then they could continue as they are.
They're not a 501c3, they're a
No, I
city
know,
committee.
they are a city committee, and I'm wondering why they are a city committee.
Because they just do work things with the city. They work, Elena is the staff person, the community relations, they're part of community relations. They're not a 501c3, nor would they litigate and do all of the things that would be required for a 501c3. They've been an established city committee for well over 20 years that I know of. It could have been longer than that.
But there are other organizations that, excuse me, do a lot for the city. The Garden Club, for example, just to stay within that realm of things. So I'd like us to think about this. Is it a good idea to have this actually as a city committee?
How about we have,
Yes.
we'll let staff.
Ask Public Works, ask the community relations if they like having the beautification committee.
Okay, well, I just want to further justify my conversation about the beautification. Not that I may need to, but for those of us who want to change beautification because the ETJ was removed from us, my logic on that is we should have fixed that language before this. So if we had a problem with it being 28461, instead of the ETJ, we should have fixed the language before this. So, you know, it's existed before. So I don't really see with that particular committee, I don't see an issue with it continuing to exist into the future.
I don't, for purposes of tonight, I don't know that we have to define that as all the way. There's a motion to have that carved out by itself. There's a motion to allow staff to work on that and bring it back to us. And at that point in time, once we have the hard copy or the electronics and we can look at it, we can further debate. But for this evening, we have a motion on the floor and a second. Is there any other discussion?
I am that other committee, and I do have that one individual that I'm going to disassociate from a committee that she works very hard, committed. It's, you know, if we're going to take away anyone on the outside being on these committees, then I want to restructure the cemetery committee and take away these automatic appointments for historical society, because they really don't play a role in the cemeteries anymore. They did, but now that we maintain the cemeteries and do those kind of things, those organizations are not interacting with the cemetery anymore. So,
Mark, would you entertain doing that after we get this first thing done? And the person that you're talking about would still be allowed to participate, just not a voting member if this goes through. But we can come back and look at the cemetery because it was a unique construct in the beginning, and you can tell us about the pros and cons of it, and then we can decide after that. But I'm trying to figure out how we have closure on this right now and ask staff to do what we've asked them to do. Does that make sense, sir?
if the motion includes my cemetery committee, at this moment, I'm going to have to vote no. If you amend and separate the cemetery committee so that we can work on that issue as well, I can move forward.
It would allow for consulting membership from that person, just not a voting seat any longer.
I believe that the motion is to send this to staff to work on and get back to us with solutions for how to deal with this, not voting on what we're going to do tonight.
No, the motion is that every committee must have a resident of Southport, no ETJ, no 284, with the exception of beautification. So that's the motion. And
As voting membership.
as voting members. So I would, just so that we can move forward, I'd recommend we carve that out also. Yeah, I would recommend that, if y'all could amend it.
I will amend the motion to carve out cemetery so we can move forward.
To
So,
clarify what carving out means, can you clarify that, Alderman Kelly?
Just like beautification, we take it out of the main motion and we put it off to the side for additional conversation that could come back with something different.
so we have a motion, we have a second. Any more discussion? Not seeing any. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Unanimous. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, I want to tag on to the conversation that I don't think there needs to be a motion on this. Board of Adjustment, did we sort of suggest 7 people? Is that correct on the Board of Adjustment? 7 people?
We suggested an odd number so there would not be a tie.
Can I suggest, or do I need to make a motion?
So that's in staff's current proposal, that there was originally 5 inside city representation, 2 ETJ members. So our recommendation is to move the Board of Adjustment and Planning Board to 7 inside representation and 1 alternate from in-city. So that's the current plan.
So when you say inside, we have 2 wards, 3 on one, 3 on the other, 1 unofficial, or are we just going to have them all open?
Right, just at large, not based on wards.
Which is what we should
Now,
do with.
Parks and Recreation wants wards.
That's right.
They've traditionally had wards.
And I also think by statute, both of those boards must have proportionate ETJ representation. So if you don't have one anymore, then.
We have to change the code to change that.
And the UDO.
Yep.
We'll do that. Thank you, sir.
All right. We're still good? Okay. The committee reports are in your package. The manager's report.
Okay, I'll move through this quickly. Manager's report, August 2024. First of all, ETJ update is the first priority. Just to let the public know, and y'all know, so we're all on the same page where we're at with that, the status. The County Planning Board public hearing occurred August 12th, where the following concerns were presented by citizens and myself. 1, consider the impact of the zoning differences so that the former ETJ's new zoning can be compatible with the density and uses that those residents have now and desire currently. We stated this to the planning board. Think about what those residents have said they want. 2, quality of life and property values for the former ETJ owners. Please consider that with your zoning. Safety for emergency evacuations. We discussed that there are only really 2 entrance ways in and out of the city, and you have to consider that when you add in Sunny Point and the nuclear plant. 4, maintain the commercial appeal of downtown Southport with the North House Street corridor overlay. 5, preservation of the character of a historic downtown Southport. We presented these to the board and they were listening. 19 citizens spoke, along with Alderman Mosteller as a citizen, and myself. Planning Board Chair Hodgen and Planning Board Member Fisk spoke as citizens of the county. Ms. Meehan represented Planning Department. My talk was about 5 minutes. The decision reached by the County Planning Board. So let's be clear, the zoning proposed by the county was approved, with 2 members stating openly that they regretted having to move so quickly due to the 60-day limit, and stated that they wanted to work with city staff on a North House Street corridor overlay and UDO amendments for compatible zoning uses. The path forward, while some folks may wish to appeal, the door, I think, is open for us as a government to work with the County Planning Board on ongoing projects. The North House Street corridor overlay is one, and possible UDO amendments. Okay. Next, the Inclusive Park Regional Location Update. I have met with regional managers from Brunswick County, Oak Island, Caswell Beach, Boiling Springs Lake, and Bald Head Island, and identified 4 options, all outside of Southport. However, we agreed to give the managers time to research the sites themselves, perform some due diligence, and consultation with their respective boards before releasing the sites. There's still some preliminary homework to do, but we did decide on 4 sites. I will notify you once all the managers are good with releasing the options, but I'm happy to present that there is progress. We've identified some options. Finally, the assistant city manager taking a new position in Virginia, excuse me, and the new city clerk. The new clerk, Mr. Noah. Good job, sir. Nothing like starting right in the middle of things. So all right. Began August 12th here tonight, and his clerk duties are now underway. I just want to say I work with the staff day in and day out. It's my privilege to do it. You guys are very good professionals. I'm very impressed. So I do want to recognize the departure of Ms. Dutton, who accepted a position in Virginia. I wish to acknowledge her commitment and dedication. She made a significant impact on this organization, carried a lot of weight through some vacancies, and had an impact on the city, which is all any public servant can ask, which I've seen in only my 45 days here. I just want to say I know she will have a similar impact in her next position in Virginia, so I hope if we see her, we all wish her well, and God bless. Thank you. That's it. I conclude my report.
Okay, the next is the mayor's report. I have a little public service thing here. Alderman Kelly and I attended the commissioners meeting yesterday in Bolivia, and NC DOT gave a talk about the closure of 133. It will start on or about October 28th of this year. It will be completed, hopefully, no later than August 1st of 2025. They have put in a number of incentives to get it done, hopefully by the end of May. There's cash incentives. Every day that they advance to a set number, they would get more money to do that. There's 5 problem areas on 133. This addresses 2. And the reason they're doing that, because obviously if they're going to fix the other 3, they have to come back and close it again at some time in the future, is because the way they fund roads in North Carolina. And they don't use bonds, they have to have cash in hand. So they're using the money that they have to attack 2 issues right now. One is they're going to build a bridge and raise the road up 5.5 feet, I think it is.
just north of, it's just north of Funston Road. Is where the bridge is going to be. And then they're also doing a larger culvert just south of Funston Road on the south side of the old Forts golf course.
So they're replacing a 60-inch culvert with an 84-inch culvert. Those are the two projects. So people in the beginning will say, well, if there's 5, why are they only fixing 2? They have to close it down again. It's just the way. If they kept the money there and tried to wait for it to do all 5 at one time, as the world would turn, that money would disappear, not because it went in somebody's pocket, but it would be dedicated to something else. So they're doing, I believe they're really doing the right thing. The detour for us is we go on 87 all the way to 17 through Bowling Springs and all the way down that road and hang a right on 17 to go to Wilmington. There is another option that I'm not familiar with, but one of the commissioners was aware of it, that may be a little bit shorter. But I don't know the name of the road because I don't know the name of the road. But we'll put that out to everybody to make sure that they know what's going on. The second thing that came out of that meeting was there's a company that gives briefings to the Board of Commissioners, and this particular briefing had to do with monies, grant monies in the state of North Carolina for stormwater and drinking water, to the tune of $724 million in total that we have not been made aware of. The governor just announced $421 million to jurisdictions in North Carolina. I don't know if that's a repeating amount of money or how that's going to happen, but this has all been given to the city manager to look into since we just got it, and you probably will not, we don't hear those things trickling down from Bolivia. So they have the grants that we talked about last night in their emails, and they'll be able to look at that and see what other grants are out there. As we move forward with, I believe it's the end of October, we should have the stormwater mapping done, I think so. I think that's when it is. So, in a parallel universe, we can start looking at grant money, what's out there, how do you apply for it, all that paper flow stuff, so that we can hit the road running once the mapping is done and we figured out what needs to be done. I want to compliment the entire staff. I had the privilege of being allowed to go to their staff meetings every morning during the storm. It was well conducted. Everybody knew what their job was. They've been here forever. They understood what the conditions were and how the roads dry up or don't dry up or where the problem areas were. And it was a pleasure being allowed to be there for the 10 o'clock briefings. So I want to kudos to the chief, Drew, for being the lead, but for all the staff for all of their work on that. And that's all I have. So I'm going to start with Alderman Lay. Anything? Alderman Spencer?
I'm going to go back to the thing that I mentioned earlier, and it sort of stuck with me. How do we look at our right-of-ways now that we're not trying to dig water lines up, we're not trying to dig up sewer lines? Do we need to interact with the county and discuss with them how we deal with our right-of-ways? We're making rules on our right-of-ways that they're going to have to deal with. So do we need to be interacting with the county, talking to them? Because they're the ones that are going to have to face digging up people's property and then saying, put it back. It's not us anymore. So and again, I sort of got this. I was on a phone call Saturday, and somebody was at the park, and they said, oh, the water's out at the park. And I'm like, oh, no problem. I'll call Tom Stanley. Guess what? We can't call Tom no more. That's the new life we live.
Alderman Kelly?
Alderman Spencer and I attended the Electro-Cities Conference in Asheville beginning of last week. It was an eye-opening experience to be there, to learn more about electricities and what we are part of, but also to interact with the other municipalities who are also part of that and seeing how they are dealing with some of the issues that we're coming up with over and over again. So I think that was a valuable thing for us to be there and to interact with those folks. And I think that going forward, we need to look very closely at our electricity and our grid, and as we continue to drop our lines underground, how we best serve the citizens of Southport with that going forward.
Alderman Davis.
Thank you. Alderman Spencer mentioned something about, wanting to call the Public Works Director and tell him about something that needed to be done. That's not new. Under council manager form of government, we don't tell any staff what to do. We've got two people that we manage and give instructions to, and that is the city clerk and the city manager. The appropriate process here is we call the city manager. Stuart gets the good news that something needs to be done, and then he figures out what he's going to do with it and deal with it. This is something that, of course, confuses the public a lot. There's a whole bunch of nonsense on social media. The Southport, Illinois, or Indiana, Southport, Indiana. There are a whole bunch of Southports in the states. I think there's something like 15 or 29. Okay.
9 in the States and 4 outside of the United States.
Okay, or Southport. Okay. Well, this thing was that the mayor had fired the police chief. And of course, the expected angst and confusion and hello, here he is. The mayor didn't fire him and doesn't have the power to fire him. We only hire and fire city clerks and city managers, period. Huh?
And there's a lawyer, 3 people.
Well, he's not actual employee, he's contract. Okay, anyhow, so there's that. Second, did I, in your discussion about being at the commissioners' meeting, did I understand you to say that the commissioners, our county commissioners, have known about this money being available and have not communicated it to us, or what?
As far as I know, they learned about it yesterday.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Thank you for telling us. And
You can still not like them.
I can still not like them. That's right. But I also want to say, welcome to Noah. Among the many things that convinced us that he was a good hire is the fact that he was chairman of the planning board in the community that he lived in. So he kind of knows how city government works, and of course he is a certified city clerk. Welcome aboard.
I'm impressed he's still here today after this.
Sorry. This is so far actually a short meeting.
And let's move that along. Alderman Carroll passes, Alderman Mosteller.
I just want to be real clear to all the volunteer organizations and committees we were discussing this evening that Southport runs on volunteers. Without volunteers, our quality of life would not be near what it is today. So I just want to acknowledge that, and I want anyone that heard any of this conversation to know that this board does not take any of that lightly.
Thank you.
I will entertain a motion to go into closed session.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Not hearing any. All in favor say aye. Oh, yeah. I'm sorry. Yep. The closed session is in regards to North Carolina General Statute 143-318.11 to consider qualifications of witnesses and to consult with attorneys, and to establish a public body staff or negotiating agents concerning positions to be taken on behalf of the public body. So, I'm sorry, so we have a motion and a second. Did we, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? We're in closed session. Thank you.
So move.
I'd like to take a motion to come out of closed session.
So move.
All in favor? I'd like to make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?